Moored fishing boats sagged in the harbor's waves as the lights on Clevedon's wooden pier flickered in the wind. A storm was brewing over the swollen waters that separated England from Wales, the dark clouds bulging with rain. But Maggie Emerson didn't move from her bench along the wide promenade. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her warm woolen skirt over her stockings. In the summer, day trippers paraded up and down this promenade, gawking at the sailing boats and the Welsh mountains across the estuary. They clambered over the rocks along the shoreline and paid 2 pennies each to stroll onto the famous pier that stretched over the water. But few people visited Clevedon this time of year, and on stormy nights like this, most of the town's residents hunkered down in the safety of their homes. Maggie knew she should return home too, but even when the clock tower chimed 5 o'clock, she didn't stand. Her gaze remained fixed in the distance, where salty water from the Bristol Channel collided with the River Severn. Every evening, after she finished her work at the library, she sat on this bench and watched for a certain yacht to appear. But for the past 2 months, all she'd done was sit alone, watching the fishing boats sway. Aunt Priscilla had warned that the yachtsmen who stopped here only wanted one thing, and then they'd be gone. Maggie hadn't understood what her aunt meant at the time, but now she knew exactly what Elliot wanted when he'd sailed into their town. Last summer, when Aunt Priscilla found out about Elliot, she'd threatened to pack Maggie's suitcase and drive her to the station for the next train headed to London. But Maggie had sworn that she'd never see him again, and she'd kept her promise. Until Elliot sailed back in October. Another wave smashed into the seawall of the promenade, and the pier lights flickered one more time before darkness fell over her. Elliot had said he would return by Christmas and spend the rest of the winter in Clevedon with her. He said they would marry, and when the weather turned warm, they would sail far away from here. But more than 2 months had passed since she'd seen him, and now... Her hand rolled over her abdomen, her tears mixing with the icy raindrops that began to fall from the sky. Aunt Priscilla and Uncle Timothy, who weren't really her aunt and uncle at all, might wonder why she hadn't returned home yet, especially with the impending storm, but as their 3 biological children grew older, they'd stopped asking where she went after work. The Frasers had been fostering her since she was 5, and recently they'd made it quite clear that it was time for her to either marry or return to London. She had opted for marriage, or at least she thought she had. She rocked against the bench, her arms wrapped over her chest. What was she supposed to do? If the truth of her indiscretion took wings, it would taint the impeccable reputations of her aunt and uncle and destroy all they valued. Everyone in town admired Aunt Priscilla for her charity work and Uncle Timothy for championing the production of penicillin. If Aunt Priscilla found out about the baby, she would insist Maggie hide her shame, their shame, from the entire town. And Maggie couldn't blame her. Though the Frasers had required Maggie to work hard over the years, she knew they'd sacrificed much for her. The people in Clevedon treated her like she was one of the Frasers' children, but she'd never stopped missing her brother or parents. While she knew her dad and Mum would never return, she'd dreamed for years about reuniting with her younger brother, Edmund. He had been evacuated with her in 1940, but after the war ended, the Frasers sent Edmund off to an orphanage. Maggie had begged them to keep her brother, swore she would care for him, but they'd only wanted a girl. Then, by the time she was old enough to travel to Swindon to visit him, Edmund was gone.